again, welcome back. Here we are to continue our study of JavaScript and asynchronous code. In the previous 3 videos, we looked at how asynchronous code works, how to handle it with a callback, how to handle it with a promise, how to use async and await with promises. In this video, what I'd like to look at is the homework assignment and the challenges for the homework, right? So here I am in the class syllabus, and I'm going to scroll down to class number 6, February 9, and here's the lesson. And we kind of went over this stuff in the previous videos, and here's a link to the homework assignment. So I'm going to click on this link here, and this gives us some starter code and some challenges. Okay, so here are the challenges, and the starter code is up here, right? I actually have 2 of these HTML files. Really, all the starter code is just in this HTML file. So we're just going to start with some really naive code. And what we want to do is we want to break that code apart and refactor it and make it into something really flexible, easy to use, easy to share as a separate library, right? Instead of being, all wrapped into an HTML file. Okay. So I'm going to go to the big green button here and click download as zip. And I'll just download all of the code to my, my downloads folder. I'll open it up here and open it in VS Code. And then let me hide this thing. And let's take a look. So what do we have here, right? So what we have here is I have 2 HTML files. I made a copy for some reason. I can't remember why that copy is in there and it got pushed to the thing, but to GitHub, but we're just going to use this index HTML. Okay, this is what you're going to use. And if we take a quick tour here, I've got an app that's called Ms. Merriweather, and it's got a style sheet. Okay, so I added some styles for you. And then at the bottom here, it's got a body tag with a div that has a container in it, and there's a form in the container with an input field that accepts your zip code. And when you tap on it, it searches for weather for that zip, okay? For that zip location, right? I set the input up here with a bunch of attributes, right? Just so, it kind of has a placeholder that says, please enter your zip code or zip code. It's got a title, right? It's got a pattern right here. So this pattern just like it kind of filters input so that it conforms to a valid zip code. And it has to be type number, right? But that's kind of, stuff. That's kind of normal stuff, right? Like you can do that anywhere. And then this H1 right here and the description paragraph, this is where the weather will show. So it'll show the temperature here and it'll show a description for the weather here. And if we look at the script tag down here, you can see I've got some, vanilla JavaScript that gets references to some of those elements on the page. It's got a event listener that handles the form submission. And then at the bottom here, it has a function called getWeather, kind of like we did earlier, right? But this one's a little different, right? And it goes out on the internet and it gets the weather data from Open Weather Map, okay? So what you'll need to do is you'll need to make your own API key, right? But otherwise you can leave the rest of this the same. Let's test this out right now. So I'm going to click on the Go Live button. You'll need to run this in a local server. You can't just open it from the desktop. So I'm using VS Code, and I've installed. I'm going to go to extensions here, like Code Preferences Extensions, and I've installed Live Server, right? So there's Live Server, and if you click on this, it's Ritwick Day. Version 5.6.1 or whatever it is, right? So you can install this, and if you install Live Server, it'll give you a button down here at the bottom that says Go Live, right? And the Go Live button, what it does is if you have an HTML file selected in your files list, it'll create a live server, like a local host server, and then it'll open the selected file in that server and then run it, okay? And we need to do that because otherwise this calling fetch right here will give us a CORS error, right? Because you're not allowed to open files at a different domain than the current domain that you're at, right? So anyway, we can get into CORS later, but this will be a CORS error if we don't use the live server. If you have another localhost server set up, like if you're using brackets, it has the built-in localhost server. You can click the little lightning bolt button in the upper right, okay? You know, or you might have some other situation set up that you can use. So anyway, so I'm gonna select the index file and click on go live, and then it starts the server, and then this is what my app looks like, okay? Maybe I'll resize this so we can kind of see the code side by side. And what I'll do is I'll type in a zip code. Let's do 90210. Okay, and I'll hit return, and then it says 56 degrees, overcast clouds, right? So here is the temperature, right, which is displaying right here. And then this is the description, okay? And we've got our description there. And then this form element right here, the input is, you know, the left side, and then the search button is the button over here, okay? And then, you know, it looks the way it does because of the style sheet, right? So I added some styles, okay? And then this is all the code that's running. So whenever I type in a zip code, like if I do 901, wait, let's do 94110, I think that's San Francisco. So we'll do 53 degrees in San Francisco, right? So whenever I hit return or hit the search button, it's going to handle that here by, you know, using this submit event listener, and the submit event listener is going to grab the zip code data from the form and then call get weather and pass the zip in. And then we're going to call fetch. So in the previous example, when we used set timeout, that's kind of was a stand-in for this fetch call. So fetch is an asynchronous call that returns a promise, okay? So it returns a promise, and you can see I didn't use any of the fancy async and await. I just used .then, and .catch, okay? And fetch works in this way. So when you first call fetch, like so if I call fetch with a path, right, it returns a response object. And the response object is not necessarily, it's actually not the data that you were asking for. So I'm waiting for JSON data to come in, and this response object is not the JSON data. So the response object here is just a connection to the server. So it says like, hey, we've made a connection to the server, and then it's asking you, how would you like to stream the data from the server? And there's several different ways you can do that. You can say response.json, you can say response.text, you can say response. I think blob is another one, right? So we want to stream the data as JSON, right? So I'm saying like, hey, I want the data as JSON. So if I say response.json, this function returns a promise. So we'll call .then on that promise, and what this promise is going to resolve to is a JSON object. So I'll get the JSON object here, and then I can grab the temperature and grab the weather description from it and display those. Okay, so here I'm just setting inner HTML on my temp object and inner HTML of the description object, right? So there's a temp object, description object, right? So, and then at the end here, I can do a .catch. So what's nice about catch with a promise is that if you have multiple .thens, you only need a single catch. So you don't have to catch an error here and catch another error here. You just put catch at the end. And if any one of these fails, it skips all the way to the bottom and calls catch, okay? So, so that's kind of like a quick overview of fetch, right? But what I'd like you to do now, here's your challenge, right? And we'll go over the challenges in the, they're written into the assignment, right? So we'll take a look at that. But the goal here, if we just look at the code, is to move all of the code here that gets the weather into its own file, but leave the code here that's specific to this HTML document, right? So the idea is I'd like to move getWeather into its own file because then I could use the getWeather method anywhere, right? But what I want to do is I don't want to do actually is I don't want to have the inner HTML or this reference to an HTML element, right? Document get element by ID. That's very specific to this document. This description element is very specific to the document. Like I don't want to leave these here. Like I don't like anybody that's going to use getWeather, they're just going to want to return the JSON object and catch this JSON object, right? Or receive the JSON object, right? And then they can use the JSON object with the code here, okay? So that's your challenge there. Give that a try and see what happens, right? So and we'll go over the challenges here, right? So I'm going to go look at our code here, and so here we downloaded the source code there, and let's read through the challenges, right? Actually, let's cover the learning objectives first. So hopefully you're going to be able to, implement callbacks and handle asynchronous actions, use functions to create callbacks, design functions and objects that implement callbacks, use promise to handle async actions, use async and await to handle promises, and describe promise and its use. So if you can describe this to someone else, you've handled that learning objective, right? Right? And actually, if you can explain it, you know a lot more about it than if you can just use it. Okay? So that's actually an important one. So so here's an overview of the weather library. Challenge number one is to look at the getWeather function that's contained in index.html and to make it portable. So by portable, I mean like I want to put it in another file so that I can include that file with any project that might want to use the weather data, right? And calling that getWeather function should return a promise or use a callback so that I can get the data from it. Okay, promise is probably our best choice there, but you could use a callback too. Okay, one of the other problems here is that the API key is contained within this getWeather call. So what I'd like to do is remove that because I don't want to give my API key with this function to anybody that might use it. So this function, it's going to take in the zip, but it also should take in the API key as a parameter. Okay? So that's our first challenge, right? And then the second challenge is to handle like how the promise resolves, right? So when this resolves, we need to be able to set the temperature data. So really what you want to do is something along these lines, right? You want to call, getWeather here with maybe the zip and the API key, right? And then if this returns a promise, you're going to handle that promise here, right? And in your callback, you're going to do the work here, okay? So this is where you want to take this, right? And then move this function somewhere else, and it's going to have to return a promise, right, instead of handling these things, okay? So that's your challenge. Challenge number 1 and 2, right? And challenge number 3 is to handle errors. So right now there's no error handling. It just console. Well, actually, I guess there's a little bit. It console logs a message to the the JavaScript console. But what would be better is if we actually printed the message. So you need to handle a message here if something happens, right? You need to be able to handle the error here. And then if that error occurs, you need to also display the error somewhere, right? So maybe we say what the error message is here, or you could make a new HTML element and display the error maybe underneath the zip code entry field, okay? And then challenge number 4, and challenge number 5. We'll go over these later, but try getting started on those, and we'll talk about these, right? So there's your challenge. Get started on challenges 1 through 3, and then I'll kind of go over some solutions in the upcoming videos.